Right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this reconvened budget scrutiny meeting. The first thing I realise is I owe you all an apology in that I didn't emphasise at our last meeting that that was actually being broadcast. So I'm belatedly telling you that that was the case, but also explaining that this meeting is being recorded and then will be, as I understand it, uploaded in the course of tomorrow. So as long as everybody's aware of that. The second point is that we did something quite remarkable in that we persuaded David Redgewell to not deliver his full public forum statement on Tuesday so that he could save it for Don and officers this afternoon. So, David, if we can go into your statement at this point, that would be really helpful.
Yes, well, I think the real concern is that the West of England Mayor Combined Transport Authority is now the legal transport authority for delivering public transport in the city region, but the Mayor, Dan Norris, doesn't have precepting powers. So the difficulty he has is relying on the three unitary councils plus North Somerset to deliver money to run that authority in the form of its public transport function. The Act of Parliament says that the bus service is provided on a joint basis, a supported service network, and will be funded by the unitary authorities. The difficulty we have this year is there's simply not enough funding to cover the cost of providing the bus services. The cost of running them has gone up by First Group and Stagecoach, predominant operators in our city region, and that's causing the issue to become very, very difficult. However, if we don't find a solution, we will be left with a large number of buses in the city region being, in fact, 42 will be removed from the network on the 1st of April, maybe a little bit longer just after the local elections in Baines and South Gloucestershire. The problem we have in Bristol is the main links to Southmead Hospital are being cut, the 17 which runs from Keynsham across through Kingswood and up through to the hospital, which is a 18-hour-a-day service, 7 days a week, which is funded by this authority, South Gloucestershire and Baines. The 506, which is the only bus that runs through parts of Easton and Eastfield, and then goes up to the hospital and is used by staff and patients visiting the hospital. South Bristol becomes a bus desert of any orbital bus services. There will be buses coming out from the city centre, but there will be no buses crossing South Bristol apart from the airport flyer, which is the A4 from Bath. So we lose the 96, which goes from St Anne's all the way through to Hartcliffe, serves South Bristol Hospital, and serves a lot of Carries Bales constituents, and is a major school bus as well for South Bristol, for the colleges in Brislington. And that service is every 2 hours and obviously is well used and it's a heavy double-decker service. We also lose the 52 from Bishopsworth into the city centre. That is gone completely. There's no alternative service into Uplands or that part of Bridgewater Road. And also the link to the Chew Valley is gone, so there is no bus on that service on that road at all. And then we're left with the Whitchurch Estates area, Park and Hengrove. We're building loads and loads of houses, and we put a 516 on to serve all that area, which links 12 hours a day up and down from Knoll, and connected with the main bus network and into the city. We also lose Brislington Town Service. That's gone completely. There's a town service bus that goes around Brislington, along with a similar one over in Keynsham and Baines. And the link between Whitchurch and Keynsham is also lost. So there's also the one that's going to cause the most grief, and I wait for Don to answer the emails. We're going to lose the one between Oldbury Court down through Fishponds Road, and there will be no bus through Ashley Wards, through St Paul's or through St Werburgh's. These are some of the poorest communities in our city region. It's all right saying we want to warm the spaces, or we want to I thought we're in the business here of dealing with social justice, social inclusion and social poverty. But if people can't get around our city region to get to work, to school, to education, we have a real problem. On top of that, we have the government's bus grant running out on the 1st of April. That's the main. Every other bus in the city is funded by the DFT at the moment, so city region. So we have a real serious issue, and I don't know what happens, but there should have been a debate with the three unitary authorities on what's called the transport levy. that is really a grant that Mark Harper says should be passported. It's an amount of money the council shouldn't be raking off for other function, but should be going to the West of England Mirror Combined Authority to run its public transport services. So I'm extremely concerned. It's the biggest issue. We're probably the biggest combined authority to making that level of cuts. I've checked with all the other combined authorities. Most of them have found millions of pounds to replace the budgets by going into reserves and all sorts of things to keep buses on the road. That's in Newcastle, Greater Manchester, Liverpool City region, even the Mayor of Cambridge and Peterborough, where he found £1.4 million to save 17 routes with the other local authorities to rescue. So this is a serious issue, and we can all say it's not going to happen, but we're going to have to answer to the passengers and public out there on the 1st of April when these services literally stop running and people can't get to school, work, college, and to the health authorities and to the hospitals. So this is serious, and I just want to make how serious this actually is. The same comments are being made by my colleagues at the other three unitary authorities that form the West of England Mirror Combined Authority and also at North Somerset Council. And the only other thing I would say... Can I
bring you to a close,
David? Final point. We're pleased we're getting the money, by the way, to run the Bristol to Gloucester rail service from the Mayor, the Metro Mayor. So that's all part of wanting to get the mass transit system around the Greater Bristol area. But the other point I want to say, and I think Stephen's going to pick it up now, I'm a director of the ferryboat company. No, I'm not a commercial director sitting in some boardroom with loads of money. I'm the equalities officer at Bristol Ferries. We had no consultation over the ferry fares of 20 pence. And we run a passenger service around the harbour, and we run a passenger public transport service. And one of the ferryboat companies, Boat 7, runs under contract to Bristol City Council to provide the cross-harbour ferry. All I would ask in future, if we're going to do with ferries, I can't, and I'm not getting involved in the harbour debate, that's nothing to do with us. We're a ferryboat company, we're public transport. We just ask that in future they talk to the public transport operators and the ferryboat company before we are suddenly pinged emails telling us we're to put our fares up and we're putting a levy in. That's all I would ask. And by the way, I welcome everything you produce from car parking fees, providing you put it back into public transport. So I don't mind how many car parks you charge, but actually that money, as long as it's passported to the West of England Combined Authority for public transport. Thanks very much.
Thank you, David. Members, I allowed David to go on for much longer than he was allocated because I think of the importance of the issue he was raising. Now, just before we go into the discussion, I just need to record, first of all, we've had apologies from Councillor Craig Cheney, because Craig's sorry he can't be here today. He's offered that he's available to be contacted by phone if needed. I assured him we would try and avoid doing that, but he's made that offer. Do we have any other apologies we should note?
I do. I have a few late. I've had a few late apologies actually. So we have Councillor Bartle, Councillor Pearce, Rippington, Quarterly, Bennett, and Councillor Varney. And Councillor Brown is substituting for Councillor Varney today. Oh yes, Councillor Reynard is coming, but he'll be late.
Okay, so we have the list of items that we identified as priority. Can I just ask members, would you agree, however, that the points that David has raised regarding bus services is something of a concern and that we should perhaps deal with that item first? Are members happy with that? Who would like to start the ball rolling? Because in which case I'll start the ball rolling and let others follow on. Don, the question I've got on this is that it's a difficult one I think for members to identify between Wecker and Bristol and understand how the situation has got to this and how it can be resolved. So I sort of hear what the Metro Mayor is saying, that and what David's saying about the levy needing to be higher in order to support the bus services. But we've also, as a budget group, been hearing from officers over the last 3 or 4 months, and the budget confirms the pressures the City Council's under to balance a budget. How do we square those two with the fact that we are seeing services being massively depleted in some of the areas that are most in need of them?
Yes, I agree with all of that. First of all, there is a problem with bus drivers, lack of bus drivers. There's no question about that. I've spoken to First, and that is a big issue. The other problem then is how do we want to approach this transport levy in the future? Would we be happy, for instance, to have a precept of 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds or whatever per household in Bristol, as they do in other combined authorities, which would go towards buses? And I think a bit of a stumbling block for that, for me, regarding that, is the fact that under the current system, a lot of that would go to shareholders of bus companies. It wouldn't be fed back into the services at all. So when you consider the bus service now is about £600,000 a year, or £1 million or £1.5 million, one of them is 2 million per annum for one bus service. We're talking about asking Bristol residents to pay a lot of money to subsidise buses which are not commercial at the moment, and they would have to accept that much of that money would go into the pockets of shareholders under the current government system. So really for me it's about what the next government in 2024 has to offer in the way of a new model of governance. That's what we need to be looking at, I think. Because then it would make it much more something I could sell to people, 20 quid, 30 quid a year, in order to get us a few good bus services would be good. At the moment, I think I'd struggle to say that to people.
So where I see a real conundrum is, on the one hand, we're talking about clean air zones, and everybody can see why we need clean air. And yet we're creating situations where many people are having to resort to using any form of transport to get around because they either haven't got a bus service or the one they have got isn't reliable enough. And so we're actually encouraging the use of vehicles which, with other policies, we're trying to discourage. And should we not be trying to address that challenge in what we're doing?
Yes, we should, and obviously the clean air zone is an approach taken by this government, as also is the commercialisation of public transport. And I think that the transport policy coming out of central government doesn't hang together very well, to be honest. There is further money under BSIP, and West of England have got control over that for the enhancement of already commercial services. So that money will go into increasing the frequency of existing commercial services. So you will have higher frequency on the commercial services. I recognise that still means that we will not have some of the subsidised services that people value. But as I say, this is a product really of central government policy. It's not within our power to do that unless we can produce an awful lot of money to put into the pockets of these companies, these operators.
Heather.
There's a lot that needs to happen to improve our buses, and some of that is to free up road space to try and reduce congestion so that the buses move faster and aren't delayed. And I wanted to know, do you have a priority about driving behaviour change to get people out of cars so we have less congestion? And what are your ideas in terms as a local authority about what we can and should be doing to drive that behaviour change so that our roads are less congested, so that our public transport works better?
So Jeff's original question, I took it to be a short-term thing. You're absolutely right that longer term, the key to better bus services, better public transport generally, whatever the governance model, is segregation, for one thing. Is to give them their own space and not have them running in and out of other forms of transport, which obviously leads to delays and unreliability and more expense because they take longer. So almost all our transport policy is geared up to the reallocation of road space towards active travel and towards public transport. We have lots of training, cycle training, etc., etc. And I can't think of anything really that we do in transport that isn't driven by the desire to take people, to incentivize people to move over to more carbon neutral forms of transport.
You talked about incentivising. I was really talking about behaviour change and the local authority's role in behaviour change. And I think what I want to know is, as a cabinet member for transport, do you believe that we have a role in behaviour change against to get people out of using cars? And would you only talk about incentivising, or are you prepared to do things to make it more difficult for people to use their cars to change that behaviour?
Well, if you look at the 3 papers I brought to Cabinet, last Cabinet meeting, all 3 of them made it more difficult for people, I think. I would see it as a levelling up, really. At the moment, traditionally, we have subsidised car travel by giving people free car parks, etc., etc., etc. I don't see it as taking away anyone's right to drive a car. I just see it as a levelling up exercise, putting the money that we've traditionally put into offering free, cheap car parking and infrastructure for cars into infrastructure for other modes of transport. If you look at all of those 3 papers, one of which was about voice and micromobility and using car parking spaces for parking of voice, another of which was district car parks, and another of which was, I forget, but that again, quite typically, push things in that direction, as everything in our transport policy does.
Andrew.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm interested in the, obviously I'm in an area where in my ward there's one of the subsidised services is going to be withdrawn as a result of the WECA decision, and what I'm interested in is the balance of input between the local authority in making that decision and WECA. How much input did Bristol have in influence in terms of the decision for services in our area?
I have discussions with officers, and officers have discussions with WECA officers. At the end of the day, we aren't offering to put in any more money towards subsidised buses. Baines put in a bit more money to continue some of their bus services beyond May for a reason that one can only guess at. We ourselves haven't offered to put in more money, and I agree with that because so much of it, it'd be difficult for Bristol residents to find it, and so much of it would go towards private operators and their shareholders. I think we'd be investing in a system that I don't support, and with a year to go to a change in central government, I'm looking for a fundamental change in the way that we do public transport in a year's time, just over a year's time.
Yeah, I'm sure. So in terms of the services that were withdrawn in Bristol, are you confident in that decision, given the lack of publicly published evidence into why those services were the subsidy for the services is not being continued versus the subsidies that are being continued?
Well, we did what we could with the money, really, when you consider that one service is about £2 million. So our transport levy pays for community transport, it pays for concessions and concessionary transport. That leaves about, I think, 3.5 million for Bristol subsidised bus services, when you consider that one service, I think, was about 2 million. It didn't leave us with a lot of options, frankly. It wasn't a difficult decision. The decision is, do we, as a city, wish to lobby for an increased transport levy so that we can have a bigger subsidised bus network in the region? And I would find that challenging at the moment, given the state of people's finances. But also, as I said, the knowledge that under this privatised system, commercial system, a lot of that would go to shareholders and wouldn't achieve great value for us.
I'm going to take Denise or John, whichever of you wants to go first, and then the other, and then I have got Tony, Mark and Barry to come after that. No? Okay.
Right, thank you. I just wanted to add a little bit to the point that Councillor Alexander was making in terms of the process and the approach. I think I firstly wanted to just reiterate the point that there is a levy that works across all of the UAs, and all of the UAs have an agreed approach. So there will be a zero increase on that levy, predominantly because there are other funding sources as well, such as the BSIP grant funding and different innovative ways to deliver some of that support via demand responsive transport. So the agreement was to set a levy at a figure, and that figure has been agreed across all UAs. Now, if there's an additional element being commissioned by one of the UAs, and that is outside of the levy, and then their own sort of individual decision. But I think that is done obviously with the full equalities impact assessment, and that's all in the WECA paper, which sort of outlines the detail on each of the routes, but also alternative mechanisms for how that support will be provided, etc., as well as that. So there is a very detailed equalities impact assessment if anybody does want to review that, and it does give an overview. But I think it was just being clear that the levy has been agreed across the entire region, and that figure has been set for all of us with the zero increase, but to reflect on the other additional funding, some of which is quite significant, to do the bus service improvements, etc., as well, and also the demand responsive transport. So it needs to be looked at in a whole rather than just that specific element. John may have a bit more that he wants to say on that.
That was very helpful, Denise. I was just going to, as well as talking about the equalities impact, talk about Don's point that he made about the short-term and the long-term differences, Chair. So short-term, we have got quite a perfect storm affecting bus services, and that's a national issue. So the combination really of primarily the lack of bus drivers currently, also the fact that patronage has not recovered fully from COVID, particularly in relation to the park and ride services, and combine that with inflation, is that the financial challenge that Denise summarised there is quite acute. Longer term, the Council was asking about some of the longer term plans. There is significant investment, capital investment that's coming in, both in terms of the capital investment for the City Regional Sustainable Transport Settlement, which is focused on trying to encourage and develop sustainable transport routes, particularly bus routes, but also the bus service improvement plan that Councillor Alexander referred to, which is additional investment in services, which is really welcome. The challenge is that there just isn't the availability in terms of drivers to deliver that sort of sustainability of service at the moment, unfortunately.
Thank you, John. Tony, did you want to pass, or do you want to come in?
I'd just make a quick point. I think one of the things I think most of us in this room realise is that the current system isn't working, and we have a current system which is based on a commercial operator delivering a service that isn't commercial, and we therefore then step in as a local authority, whether it's WECA or whether it's Bristol City Council, to make up the difference. And I'm wondering whether the approach, if we are going to stay with that general approach, whether there needs to be a review of whether that approach needs to be directed at individual passengers rather than particular routes, because it may then change the context.
Sorry, I didn't quite get your point, Tony.
My point, Don, was that the current system where we subsidise an entire route doesn't seem to be working. So I wonder if any analysis has been done about looking what would happen if we subsidise individual passengers, i.e. those who are most in need of public transport, and you're not able to use alternative provision, which may or may not include a car.
Yeah, I think the way we do services at the moment, some of them are net and some of them are gross. So on some of them we run them and we take the profit, or rather WECA takes the profit. On others of them, the operator takes the profit and we put in a certain amount of money. So there is some scope for changes there, but yeah, it's an interesting thought. Buses are just incredibly expensive to run now, and we've had some services that we wanted to run that actually no operator offered to do. There just weren't any offers to do it.
John?
Yes, I was just going to add on that obviously that is the rationale, Tony's approach is the rationale behind the demand responsive transport sort of approach. That is available in a number of areas across the region, not across the whole of the Bristol area and only in a couple of areas there, Tony, but we are viewing it very much as a pilot type of approach and to see whether that model could work in other areas as well. So that is that sort of approach, I guess, really, which we're going to watch with interest.
I think the demand responsive transport, it could work very well. It will require a change of approach from people. It will require a lot of communication from the combined authority in helping people to understand it. So we will have it in the Brislington area and in the Windmill Hill area. And of course Gloucestershire, South Gloucestershire and Baines will have it all over the place. I think it does work. It may need subsidy, but really it's the only thing that is viable at the moment financially for those kind of areas. The positive thing from BSIT is we will have higher frequencies on some of the main routes. So somebody who, for instance, used to wait 1 hour to get a bus that came right by their house might now have the option to walk 10 minutes to somewhere where they'll have a bus every 15 minutes, which is a very different experience of bus services and moves towards a mass transit option. And I think some people would say that was the way we were going to go anyway. What we need to give consideration to is that first and last mile, however one does that, to take them into the main lines, as it were, of the bus network, which is, kind of what you have in London if you're using the underground. Not everyone has an underground station at the end of their road, but they know that when they get to that station, something comes every 5 or 10 minutes. It's a different form of public transport network. But I think it's one we were moving forward to anyway, but perhaps I would have hoped that it wouldn't happen this abruptly, shall we say.
Mark.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I just wanted to make a general point that listening, because some of the question I was going to ask has already been asked. But one of the things we've got at the moment is we've actually got a perfect storm, has been said, in the fact that life's getting made harder for those that use cars, but life's also getting harder for those that use buses. So there's not a lot of faith for car users to switch to buses when they see that that's actually not getting any better either. So you have somewhere like Stockwood in the south of the city, which is, the corner, an island almost to itself, and the car parks are all going, and the bus service is being ransacked. So what options have they got left? And that's not an isolated incident. That's happening around the city in the north as well. So I think there's a lack of understanding of how people are going to act out, particularly out in the suburbs, where this gets more acute the further out you get, because there aren't any options left. Life's not just harder for bus users, not harder for drivers, it's harder for everybody now. And so if the levy came in, I don't think people would believe it would go to where it's needed. And it's not to say that all the money goes into the shareholders' pockets. A portion would. Yeah, it'd be about 4 to 8% is the standard. But most of it actually go on the bus services. But they've just got no faith that that's going to be delivered, I'm afraid, under this current arrangement. At all. Thank you, Chair.
And as John pointed out, this is a national picture. It is a failure of national planning. One of the failures of national planning.
Barry, and then Martin, and then David.
Thank you, Chair. I was also struck by Councillor Alexander's comments about shareholder profits. Like Councillor Varney, I represent a ward which is losing a bus service, the 506, which is a lifeline to patients at Southmead Hospital, particularly. Buses are a public good. This authority contracts with private companies in the course of delivering public services all the time, whether it's delivering social care or building houses. What's different about buses? Why can't we support our bus services?
Well, I do think we should support bus services, but I regard them as a natural state or local government monopoly as a service, really. I don't think that we should allow them to be subject to the market, because as we see, we don't have the level of control. If people just don't want to put on a service, or they want to charge a lot of money and they happen to be the only operator in that area, you end up without it. So we need a greater level of control over buses. They're just too important for the economy, for social reasons, for educational reasons, all kinds of reasons, to leave them just as selling like fruit and vegetable prices or something like that. It just obviously doesn't work.
Do you want to come back, Barry?
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm still just a bit puzzled by this emphasis on shareholder profit being the key factor here. That means that we can't, that we're not willing to invest now in our local bus services. I mean, like you, I would love it if many more of our public services were owned and managed publicly by all of us, but that's not the situation we're in right now. And so this decision right now can only come in the context of a bus market in which private companies are the operators, like with all sorts of services. So I'm just questioning, why is this different?
Well, it's very expensive. So, where would you like us to get the 100 or 50 million pounds a year from to subsidise a great public transport network? How would we raise that? If you've got suggestions, we can do it. But at £2 million per annum per bus service, it's an awful lot of money that we'd have to put in every year. We would have to have some sort of precept or something, which people would have to be open to. And there's a whole piece of political work there, I think, to persuade people that they would have to be happy with the extra £50 a year or £100 a year on top of their council tax bill.
Martin.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'm quite worried by this discussion. I'm also a bit concerned some of it's taking place in what's meant to be a scrutiny of a budget rather than a scrutiny of the service, which would be a different discussion. I mean, our corporate plan says what we want teams to devote their priorities to, and the budget says where our money will go. And I don't think it is clear where our money's going. We're doing all sorts of things to support buses as a city, and WECA is doing different things to support buses as a combined authority. So the highway priorities, the shelters, the information, and so on, offering the passes for older people, but we haven't offered them for younger people yet, would be commitments of the council. The government took away our right to
set up or owned a bus company a couple of years ago, 3 years ago. We can control the bus system and the services and the routes if we choose to. We need to be clear to the public what we don't control, which is privately run commercial services that come and go, the routes come and go, the buses come and go. And apart from the fact there's a driver shortage, which WECA is meant to be addressing eventually, we can do more to prioritise how we control what runs and where and when. And that has to be done in the rules that we've got. And at the moment, the rules say we can't own or set up a bus company. So we can't do that. So we can control a contract in this region for where the buses run and when they run, and we can offer those contracts and we can control how much is put into each of those services. And I think we need to be much clearer to the public when and how we're going to do that in this region, and what we're putting in the meantime that will make life as tolerable as possible for people who are finding routes vanishing. I mean, I've had routes that have appeared in my ward that didn't run a couple of years ago, and then being told they're going to be dropped because they are commercial services and the company chooses to run them for a bit and then decides it's not making money and deletes them. And the information isn't always accurate. We don't always know what's running and where. I think we need to be clear as an authority what we're doing to it and what we're doing with the West of England Combined Authority, and how we're going to map out a route to better predictable services that people can rely on. Albeit we've got to have more drivers to do some of that, but as soon as they're available, we want to know where the routes will be. And I'm disappointed that we're just being told, because this is being run by the private sector, we're limiting what we're going to do about it. As was said, we don't do that about anything else where we contract with the private sector. Let's just have contracts, franchises, and a map to get there so that people know what's going to run, and then they can plan their lives accordingly.
Don, do you want to respond?
Well, yeah, under the current system, that will cost us a lot of money to do that. Yeah.
We are paying quite a lot for quite a lot of services. At least if we know what we're going to get for them, I would argue it's worth it if we're providing the service that's needed. That's part of the social value of what we're offering, is a better environment, a better connectivity for people where they need to be. And our share of that investment, we need to agree what it will be, and with the other authorities what their contribution will be, and when we're going to get there. At the moment, if you pick up the budget, you have no idea what we're doing about it, really. And that's my concern in terms of this as a budget scrutiny debate.
Well, for the purpose, I'm just answering the questions that are put to me, but for the purposes of budget scrutiny, our contribution transport levy, I think, is about 10 or 11 million, something like that, isn't it, Denise? It's 10.2 million. If we want to discuss increasing that, then of course we can do, but it would have to be increased by a lot to have a substantially different bus network. I would also say that we do need to work with the other unitaries on that. We want a regional system. So I don't approve of individual authorities throwing in money to the pot and eventually us just saying, we'll each throw in the money that we need for our own services, because that undermines having regional transport. So, but ultimately, we could put in more money, a lot more money, and have the service that we want, but it would be a lot more money.
I'm going to take John, and then I'm going to throw a question at David Redgewell, because I know he's quoted figures at previous meetings. And David, just noticed that what I'm going to ask you is what are you advising that the per household or per head contribution ought to be on a par with? I'll come back to you after I've taken John, but I'm just giving you notice now, and I also notice I want a brief answer as well.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to give some reassurance. Obviously, we do have a mixed model at the moment, so it's a commercial model, it's a supported services model, it's based on the transport levy, which covers a lot of things other than bus services, and of course it's in a context of severe financial pressure on the council's budget. But suffice to say that Councillor Alexander and officers have spent a lot of time looking at the services that are to be retained to try and maximise the coverage that we can. Of course, there's been significant reduction, Councillor. I'm not suggesting other than that, but just to reassure you that we have worked hard to try and retain the services that we could.
Right, David, can you just remind me of what the Bristol contribution per head or per household is?
£20, and it's got to go up to at least £40. And the issue that First Group is a private, big commercial bus company. It runs our rail services as well. It's actually, most of it is employee share owned, which people don't realise. And also, a lot of our contractors in the city are actually, with Secretary Stagecoach, are actually social enterprises. So it's those very companies that are going to make people redundant. We also, I've been at Lawrence today, we have 80 more drivers starting. So the myth that we don't have drivers, by the way, just to clarify something, we have no demand response, so please correct yourself. We have no demand responsive services in Bristol except for Totterdown and Brislington. All the rest.
Yeah, David, if I ask you anything else, you need to use your microphone. Otherwise, it's not captured. But no, if we can nip that. But thank you for that.
£40 would be to make it viable, but that's what we need to run a public transport system, including the mayor's paying for the trains between Bristol and Gloucester and Severn Beach.
Okay, thank you, David. And David.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to make a couple of points because I'm slightly bemused by Councillor Alexander's stance about giving money to the shareholders of First Bus, and I'd like to understand what the difference is between Bristol City Council giving money to First Bus and Bristol City Council giving money to the shareholders of Vattenfall, Amoresco and Arcadis, all of which we've gone into strategic partnerships with.
It doesn't really seem a valid comparison, really, does it? I mean, in one case we have put our assets into a joint venture. In another case, we have here something that is a service, like water, electric, or other things which should be provided to people, regardless of their wealth. Because they need it for health and social and whatever other reasons. I'm just saying that I don't think that should be ruled by private companies. I think it should be the state or the local authority that has control over that and says how it runs.
We'll see. The other point I'd like to make is a corollary to Councillor Weston's point about car ownership. The 47/5 service is being cut, and it serves some of the areas of the city with the lowest car ownership rates in the city. And we need to be able to provide a method of people in Ashley and Lockleys and Stapleton to be able to get around the city, and we're not. And that service is being cut. So I'm bemused to understand why the council's not supporting that service as an utmost importance.
If we did, we would have to cut other services that came from our park and rides or went to the hospital or other things which are equally or more important. I mean, we have cut services that are important to people because we do not have the money to subsidise them at the rate at which the operators are asking us to pay. It's very, very expensive. Their rates have gone up 111% overall. We simply can't afford to pay that with the current levy. So we have to look at doing it differently, and that's happening. That's a discussion that's happening all over the country, not just Bristol.
Right, I'm going to take John Galandris, and then I've got a couple of questions, and then I'm going to try and sum up this because I think we could talk about it all night, but I don't think we're going to help resolve the situation. So, John.
Thanks, Chair. We could talk about it all night. Just want to remind everybody that parliamentary privilege does not apply in this chamber, and we can be sued for saying things that are completely incorrect. And phrases have been bandied about massive dividends and shareholders getting very rich. Just point out that no dividends were paid by First Group to their shareholders in 2021, 2020, 2019 or 2018. So just to set the record absolutely straight.
I think, really following on from that, but it was actually questions asked by two Green councillors, because it was much better when they asked questions about commercialism than us Tories asking it. But I am trying to understand how the subsidy works, and perhaps now isn't the time to go into the detail, but I do have a real concern, because if £2 million, you say £2 million is going into the pockets of shareholders, but actually my understanding is that whatever we pay should be to contribute to the loss and the costs of running that service. So there would only be a very small amount that might contribute a profit. But what I don't then follow is, do we not enter into negotiations on a route-by-route basis of what they would be prepared to run the service for, rather than just assuming it's going to cost £2 million? So I do have a real concern on how that was presented. And if I may, Don, I also have a concern. You made comments about design response transport service. And what you said about that was the way forward and that was the solution is actually very different to even what WECA said to those of us who were at the WECA Scrutiny meeting, where they acknowledged that the risk profile of design responsive transport was actually very high for a significant number of reasons. I think we all want it to work because it could be the way forward, but your assurance that it was the way forward is not what WECA was saying to Scrutiny, and it's not what the WECA risk register says. What it recognises is there is an extremely serious risk, because either not enough people take up the service, in which case it's not viable, or too many people take up the service, in which case it can't deliver, because the means of transport isn't big enough to accommodate. So I think it's really important that members who weren't at WECA Scrutiny are aware that even those who've put this package together recognise there is a risk that actually could cost WECA a lot of money if it doesn't go right. And I've raised with WECA and with John and other officers here the concern about the extra mile project that happened in my ward, whatever it was, 18 months, 2 years ago. No, maybe longer than that now, 4 years ago, when First Bus tried to put on this extra service, and it failed because it was not marketed, it wasn't communicated, and people didn't know what was happening. And a project that could have been fantastic fell by the wayside because there wasn't enough demand for it. So I'm just flagging up that we do need to be careful, and that no one knows whether this is the solution. Yeah, please do respond.
If I can respond to that. First of all, if I'm saying £2 million for a service, I'm not suggesting that £2 million goes into the pockets of shareholders. What I'm saying is that a component of that, obviously, ultimately, will go into the pocket of shareholders. Otherwise, why would they be investing in it? So that's a problem I have, not just with public transport, but also with utilities like electricity and water, is I think they should be owned by people, by the government or by local authorities, and remove that element of private profit within them. Now, on the point about demand-responsive transport is replacing services that in some places were costing up to £200 per person per passenger journey subsidy. That is the cost of an air ticket, not the cost of a bus journey. And WECA has brought that down to, I think the maximum now is £10 subsidy per person per passenger journey. I think more than that is not tenable under any governance system, because what it indicates is that a bus is going round using large amounts of fuel, very empty a lot of the time. So I do think, not just from a financial point of view, but from an environmental point of view, we do need to look at doing something radically different. I absolutely think we do. And that's why I say demand responsive transport. We kind of got to make it work, because we can't continue to run 53-seater buses, and I've sat on them. They've had 4 or 5 customers on them for quite a long period of time. That's not, it's not responsible. We need to do something different.
Thank you, Don. Oh, yeah, Heather, but very brief, because I want to bring this to a conclusion. No.
I get your point about subsidising buses that are currently empty or underoccupied, but I would hope that we have a vision where a lot more people are going to get onto buses or some sort of mass transit, and especially post-COVID, we need to be encouraging that. We need to be getting more and more people on. So yes, your point that the cost is too much at the moment, but if we replace a bus with some sort of responsive demand management, we're not making it available for everyone on that route. And would you be prepared? Like, do we not have to invest more for a certain period of time to do that behaviour change, even if it's way more than we think we should be spending on a single person's journey, so that in 5 years' time we have that behaviour change where the buses are still running and still available and there'll be a lot more people on them?
Yes, and WECA set aside quite a lot of money for communicating DRT to people. I think it's absolutely key, is people need to understand it. But also it will pick people up from all kinds of places. It will be a little bit slower, but for some people who didn't have a bus stop outside their house, it might actually be better, because they might be picked up from somewhere nearer. So it's a different understanding. And I used to have post buses, didn't you? It's just, you probably wouldn't remember that. It is just a different way of looking at things. And that then the DRT would take you then onto one of the main lines where the enhanced commercial services were running, as they are, for instance, on the Portway Park and Ride, about every 15 minutes. So you don't even need to look at the time the bus is turning up. You turn up to the bus stop and you expect one to come. So we're going to have to look at things very, very differently. As I say, this has been quite abrupt, that I don't welcome, but I think some elements of it were things that were going to happen anyway, because we had not had the political will to deal with some of the levels of subsidy on the services that had been going on for many years and had reached quite extreme levels. £200 per person, per journey per person for a rural bus service is not acceptable use of public money. It's not acceptable use of a vehicle that is using diesel.
Members, if I can just sort of summarise where we are, and I think you've all seen, I hope, the draft notes of Tuesday's meeting, which have been circulated, and I think you'll all agree that Joe and Ian, between them, do a remarkable job of distilling all that we say and do into something coherent. So so thank you both for that. So they will try to do the same with this discussion, but I think it's probably appropriate if we agree a sort of wording, and I'm thinking from the comments that have been made by all who've spoken that the general consensus appears to be one of concern about the impact on the bus service, and I'm trying to use words that I hope Don wouldn't disagree with, because I
have no problem with concern. I would just point out over and over again that this is a national picture, and we as local authorities, both us and WECA, are doing our utmost to address it in a way which is socially and financially responsible. A lot of time has gone into that, and I'm not going to say that this is perfect, but I think that we've done the best. We've been dealt a very bad hand.
Yeah. So I mean, I've just jotted down some brief words. I think we can add to those when the notes get circulated to members for comments. But I was suggesting something along the lines about concern about the impact of the significantly reduced support for bus services. And then I'm trying to read my handwriting. and that we also are concerned at how the funding is agreed between Bristol and WECA, and that we feel that there needs to be more long-term planning of how that will interact in the future. I'm simply trying to summarise there. Can I ask if there's anything there anyone disagrees with, it needs polishing up. Not least I can then translate the other few words I can't read at the moment. But yeah, Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think it's one of the points I was trying to make was we need to make it clear what our contribution is and what we're planning and getting out of that, complementing what WECA and the other authorities are doing. So we need to have it mapped out where it's going. And at the moment, it doesn't feel like we know what we're putting in or even what we're getting out and when.
You need Martin to go to the WECA papers from the meeting the week before last, and it has it laid out in endless tables exactly how much each authority is paying towards each thing, and you will see the bus support component.
Yeah, but we're providing support in a variety of ways for bus routes and bus information or bus shelters and bus passes and things like that. I just want to know the whole story.
Yes, and it is complex, and this is maybe we could arrange a members' briefing or something on how it's divided up between us. But the fact is, our levy contribution is 10.2 million. Some of that goes to concessions for elderly people. Some of that goes to community transport organisations, which are very much valued. What is left for actual bus services support is 3 point something million, and that, you know, that pays for the park and rides, possibly. That's where we're at.
I think, Don, just to highlight what I think is the frustration that those of us on WECA Scrutiny were feeling, is that we were presented with effectively a fait accompli of how much the levy was going to be, and that large numbers of services were going to be cut, and we're not aware of what debate took place in terms of establishing what the levy would be and what the relationship between the authorities was and how all of that was arrived at. Now, I think this may be a communication issue in us not understanding it, but there was certainly never any debate about whether the levy should be increased, and it would seem to me that that's something that perhaps should be going on within each authority. Maybe there is no alternative but to leave it at the level it is, but there needs to be that discussion, because it is concerning to hear the impact on a number of wards, and I can say that in a ward where the routes aren't subsidised, and therefore when my residents are not affected in the same way, but neighbouring wards are affected, and that does have a knock-on effect. And so I think we need to have more understanding. Tony, are you? Yep.
Yeah, just a very quick comment, and I do take the point about as councillors we can drill down into various tables and boxes and into documents, but we're also here to represent those people who have voted for us and elected for us, and I think we do have a responsibility to convey the information to the residents of Bristol without expecting them to have to drill down into those papers. If we don't do that, then we're not doing our job.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. So, if Ian and Joe do their magic in drafting something from where we are now, and in particular look at comments, because I think this is a concern to all members of all parties, and therefore it would be appropriate for something in our comments to full council to embellish that, but I don't propose we try and agree it at this point, because that could probably take a large chunk of the rest of this meeting. But I think there's a fair enough consensus there if you're happy with that, and we'll circulate it in the next few days so that you've got a chance to comment. Okay, thank you, Don. I don't think you're quite finished yet. I think there might be some more to come. Members, if we go to our list, now you don't have to ask questions on each of the items here, but you can do if you want to. On the other hand, you can ask questions on things that are not on the list. So it's not It's not prescriptive. This was purely a guide, but the first item that we had was savings in transport and highway maintenance. Now, as I recall, that was a £1 million saving next year, and it came back in the following year, I think was the case. But I think members wanted to ask questions, so if someone wants to ask on that. Yeah, Heather.
I wanted to understand why we think we might get £1 million in alternative income sources for 23 and 24, but that's not budgeted in for any future years, so we kind of think we might get it once, but we're not going to keep trying to get that.
Thanks, Chair. So it's kind of misleading, the terminology, I think. We seek alternative funding year in, year out, whether that be through central government, CSRTS, or the Challenge Fund, whatever that may be. This is actually another opportunity that we're looking at where we could potentially use some of the clean air zone income to do sustainable maintenance to help with sustainable ways of traffic. So the reason it would reduce is because the clean air zone's intention is to change behaviours, and if that works, then the clean air zone will not be there for, or will not be income generating for the longer term. But we would obviously continue every year, as we do every year, to seek other opportunities.
Hello? Okay. My understanding was that money from the Clean Air Zone would be very much focused on sustainable transport interventions and changing things around sustainable transport in the city. And so now I'm a little bit concerned because this just talks about highway maintenance. And now I'm a bit concerned that that money that could be quite a chunk of money that could really change our transport in the city is going to be used for routine maintenance that we have already been doing, rather than being used for that sort of transformational stuff that we need in the city.
So just to assure you, the order is very specific about what it can and cannot be used for. So it won't be just used for standard routine maintenance. It would have to pass the test that it met that criteria. We still have a substantial budget for routine maintenance.
So, Patsy, sorry to put you on the spot, but I just happen to have a routine maintenance issue in my ward of a junction of a junction on a very main road that is incredibly dangerous. And when asking for about the fifth time whether it could be processed on the list, I was told, well, it might make it to next year's list if there was enough money left in the budget. Is that what is being said across the city for almost... because this is beyond dangerous in my layman's view, and it just seemed to me that was an extraordinary response to be given when we're talking about road safety.
So we do have a criteria. I mean, I'm not quite sure what the issue is, whether it be a pothole or whether it be... I'm not clear what that issue is. But we do have highways inspectors, and we do have a regime of inspectors for all footpaths and carriageways throughout the city. And they are regularly inspected. Now, once they, if there's a pothole, I'll use for a certain example, if they're over a certain size, and forgive me, I can't remember the exact criteria, but they are put on the list and they are scheduled for repair. So I'm happy to look into that individual one, because dangerous ones should be done, and they should have been inspected as soon as you've reported it to establish what the type of repair was. So all I can say, Chair, is if you send it to me, I'm quite happy to look into it.
I like a challenge. I'll try it myself first and then come back to you if I get nowhere. Thank you, Patsy. Anybody else? Not with ward issues, though, please. Chairman's prerogative. Right, so if Tony and then Mark.
Yeah, just a quick question. So I presume the estimates for what's going to be coming on from the clean zone is based on, it's almost like a sinking fund, I guess, that is going to go down. So presumably there would be an option in there is if it's higher or lower, then we'll have to adjust somehow of what we're doing in terms to, so we may actually have, if the drivers of Bristol and North Somerset and elsewhere don't adapt as quickly as we would like them, we may actually have more money available. Or obviously we would want them to adapt as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Joe. I'm often told there's no such thing as a stupid question, and I feel like I should challenge that mantra. I just want to know a bit more about this maintenance, because apparently the money is going to be spent on maintenance, but not the usual kind of maintenance. I'm just wondering, what is super maintenance that it's going to be spent on?
It's not super maintenance, so it
I
would
wish
be.
it were. I didn't imagine it would be.
There is a criteria for what we can spend CAS income on, and there has to be sustainable. So things such as improving the walking infrastructure, cycling infrastructure. So we may want to do some highways work that would improve or maintain that highway to a better standard to enable cycling.
Okay.
Stephen?
That sounds super maintenance to me.
Just a broader point. I mean, I think what we've been doing here is trying to make a cocktail of funding to deliver you a balanced budget. And the clean air zone estimated income is an estimate. It's a forecast based on something that didn't exist in our city 2 months ago. We're looking at the data literally every week, and that's given us the ability to say with a reasonable amount of confidence we think there is the potential of putting £1 million thereabouts into what will be eligible schemes. So there are definitely things within the overall highways and carriageways works that definitely qualify both the letter and the spirit of what that CAS money has to be used for. So the other point is that there's an awful lot of reliance on CAS money for matching the CRSTS project as well, which again is based on an estimate that was made at a point in time when the bid was going in. So all of these get reviewed all the time, which is why I think the only thing we can say for certain is there looks to be £1 million that we can see next year. Beyond that, it will depend on behaviour change. It will depend on perhaps his success in winning other pots of money. There is probably about a £200 million deficit backlog in highways and structures work to go at, so we won't be short of things to spend money on if we get more money.
Okay, so if we move on to the next item, which was savings in city transport discretionary. No, is it that one? Yes, city transport discretionary activities. Who'd like to, David?
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting that we had to delve into the equalities assessment report for this saving to actually find out what the detail was. And it's cutting things like bus stop or increasing bus stop advertising, cutting money that we spend on trains, cutting money for the residents' parking zones review. But that's contradictory when there's another saving when you want to establish at least a new one in the budget. Bus stop maintenance, and I'm interested about how that will actually be implemented. What will that be? Not fixing broken seats or less cleaning for bus stops. Also, you're talking about cutting the road safety budget, and it's a really important thing to have when we've got more cars and more vehicles on the streets than ever before. So one person's discretionary is another person's essential. Can you actually detail what you're planning to cut, please?
I think that's a good summary, Councillor Wilcox, of the areas that we're looking at. In some of those areas, it is fair to say, a bit like the discussion we've just had, we think that they would be eligible for utilising some of the CAS income to substitute. So we'd continue the activity, but we'd be recording a saving. So that's certainly true of the transport studies element. We think that those would qualify under the criteria that Patsy referred to, because of the nature of the things which they're looking at. So we would continue to do that, but we'd be using alternative funding. But the list that you ran through, those are the areas that we are looking at.
So, for instance, going to the bus stop maintenance thing item, how will you actually save money? What things won't you be doing to bus stops, please?
We're talking about a reduction in the overall level of work that is carried out on bus stops, some of which is now done under the current arrangement that we have with the advertising arrangements as well. So I wouldn't be able to give you more detail of what we're looking at, but the service have advised in the context of the challenging cuts we have to make. I have to say it's not something that they came forward and said we could do, this is something we should do anyway, but in the context of the cuts that we've got to make, they've advised that is something that we could do and still maintain the assets in an appropriate manner. So these are difficult decisions, Councillor. I'm afraid that these are not easy things to do, but these are the areas that we think we can do and still maintain the service.
Thank you. I just want to add on from that, because I was actually going to raise this in the last section about buses, where often some of the frustration with bus services is the bus stops, because either they're not there anymore or the electronic services, the electronic display isn't working. This also goes into things like the apps as well. And I just wonder if that then impacts the amount of people using the buses. If people go to a bus stop and they don't know when the bus is coming, they walk away from that, then they're not using the buses, they might use an alternative transport route. So I'm just wondering if there's a bit of false economy there in not maintaining bus stops. Also a safety thing, women travelling alone at night, if it's dark, if the lights aren't maintained, if it feels like a sinister place, they may not use that. So I'm just wondering if, in terms of how much the bus services are actually used, if it isn't false economy not maintaining the kind of services around the buses, such as the bus stops, and if there's any way of measuring that financially.
It is a false economy, but as John has said, what we attempt to do is to maintain the service that we're currently offering, but fund it from different sources, because we're actually we're looking at a budget here. We're not looking at how we do the service. We're looking at how the figures are going to work so that we can actually sign this off legally, and we have to do certain things to do that, and one of them will be maybe finding money from different sources in order to do the same job. And you're absolutely right, if you have poor quality bus shelters, poor quality information, it reduces the customer experience, you get less people on buses, yeah.
Okay, we move on then to third item, savings in the Sustainable City and Climate Change Service. Heather? Then Martin, was that you? Yeah.
So there's a significant cut. I think it's somewhere close to a third of the budget for the climate change services team. First of all, I just wanted to be clear about that, because at Cabinet last week there was something very confusing said about reserves were preventing a cut, and Kai, the Cabinet member, said something about that, but I wanted to be clear that there definitely is a significant cut to that team. There's an idea that there will be other funding available to try and cover that cut, and I guess I wanted a clear answer, and I would ask for an answer probably from John Smith rather than the political answer, but do we think that in terms of protecting that service, the work that was being planned to be done over the next year with the cut that is happening, is that work going to be done, or will this cut result in a reduction of the work being done by that team and the resources available for the next year?
Thank you. Yeah, happy to take that. Councillor, it is a significant cut in the revenue budget. That is clear. It's 30% of the revenue budget. That is a significant number any way you slice it. Predominantly, Alex and the team have brought forward proposals in order to deliver that savings by utilising reserves and not seeking to extend fixed-term contracts and taking other measures so that they can continue the current work at the same level and in the same way. That's not without risk going forward, but again, it's a challenge in terms of trying to manage this. The reassurance I would give is twofold, really. The team have been extremely successful in securing external funding from a range of different sources and continue to be in the last few months, even since that news. So I'm reasonably confident that they'll be able to continue to deliver their work in the way that they have done. Similarly, they are a very important team that play a key role, but the approach to addressing the target is a cross-council piece of work. There's significant capital funding that's been put aside as well to bring forward initiatives to deliver this. So it is not that team alone that carries out the work. It is quite a small team by the council sizes. But yeah, I mean, Alex and the team have brought forward measures very much focused on trying to mitigate and manage the risks and to keep the work going at the same level. So I'm confident they'll be able to do that.
You've mentioned, though, ending fixed-term contracts. So there's people that are employed at the moment that we were probably hoping and expecting to keep, that their contracts will be ended. So that does sound like the resource will be dropped. In the climate change scrutiny group that we're both in, we were asking about the sort of priorities and where those officers in that team sit. And I know that there's a real priority around decarbonisation of heating and City Leap, which is fantastic. And there's work going on with One City and the business ask. But when asked, there was no officer who had a responsibility in terms of decarbonising our transport. There's a few people who maybe work on that area, but within the climate change services, there's no one who is focusing on transport, which is potentially about 40% of the impact that we could be having on decarbonisation in the city. And now we are cutting resources to that team, and I have a real concern. I guess I'd ask, do you think we have enough priority within climate change? I know that there are people working on sustainable transport, but within climate change services, focusing on that decarbonisation of transport.
Okay.
Council, I was just going to pick up the City Leap joint venture that we've set up and the collaboration through the energy service team, which is now the client team for City Leap. So in terms of working alongside Amoresco and Vattenfall, yes, in terms of ensuring they can deliver their plan, but utilising their expertise through the client function to work with colleagues to develop plans which will be coordinated through the service to which I head around property assets and infrastructure. So that will be working closely with Fleet. So this is collaboration rather than a one officer in a climate team to coordinate the work we need to do to decarbonise. So working closely with the collaboration with Amoresco and Vattenfall through the client function.
So is that specifically talking about Fleet, though?
Fleet within, but in the wider context of decarbonisation of our estate in relation to property, through to looking at other initiatives that are in a pipeline through retrofit, solar, wind, etc.
Yeah, I think my question though was generally the broader city transport. Yeah.
No, that's okay. Peter, it's always welcome for you to put yourself in the way of a question. That's absolutely fine. On the sustainable transport point of view, I think, Councillor, it primarily goes to the model that I was trying to describe earlier. So we don't, within the sustainable city and climate change team, have people that are responsible for delivering every element across the council. It's very much a council-wide model. Within the city transport team, there is a sustainable transport team that are focused on, securing funding and implementing projects in order to deliver decarbonisation via that route. And of course, Alex and the team work very closely with that team.
So, and I hope that we continue having that sustainable and strategic transport. And I get that team exists and they are focused on bits of funding and specific projects. I think my concern is who is it that has that big picture that says, and I think that has existed with the business asks, the One City work and the business asks and the decarbonisation of heating, that there's someone driving that all of our transport is sustainable rather than working on these specific projects, which is what the sustainable transport team does. So I think I've got a concern that there's not a real focus of that within the climate change service.
Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, ultimately, I guess that's me, Councillor. Yeah.
Martin.
Yeah, thank you. You've mentioned a client function, and a client function will increasingly be there'll increasingly be a need for a client function if we rely on offering the first chance to all the projects to Amoresco and Vattenfall, but they may not take up those projects. We have to be willing to let those projects elsewhere. If they choose not to take up projects, they just get first bite at them. We've been told that the team has to fundraise more to bring in the money to deliver specific things. So we need to have the capacity to fundraise as well. But there's the additional role. So I raised this at the meeting, the first half of the meeting, a couple of days ago, which is we need to carbon assess all that we do, capital projects and revenue services. And we've been waiting for that for quite some time. There's a very limited assessment of some large capital projects. In the start of 2019, we identified a sort of approach that was going to be needed to manage both money and capital in concert, so that when we put our money into things, we also know we're cutting carbon. Because we have to be able to cut carbon as we spend our funds in order to decarbonise it. Where is the capacity for that going to be? Because we've been waiting for several years for that as well.
So, Councillor, there was a number of things there. Did you want to talk about the client function? Was that was particularly to do with City Leap?
Both, because we need that client function, we need the fundraising function, and we need the carbon assessment function.
Well, it's true. We are standing up a new client function for City Leap. So we're currently just concluded in the 2 posts. We've got a client lead and a team of 2 at the moment. In terms of the capital programme, we've introduced a pilot approach to a sustainability framework to be introduced to the capital programme. So we're looking at a framework that we're piloting at the moment around 5 projects currently in the capital portfolio. The learning from that will come out over the next couple of months to demonstrate whether we can use that for other projects and scale that across the capital portfolio. So that's a piece of work we're doing with Arcadis, the strategic partner on our capital programme. But to give you confidence, there will be a client function within the City Leap arena, for a better word, within the council, but working closely and holding City Leap to account.
So you said...
hang on, just a minute. Kai, did you want to... Yeah, okay.
So I'm very keen that we get sight of what this approach to carbon assessment will be, because it's been asked for some time. And we proposed it right at the start, after the climate emergency, at the start of 2019. We said this is something this city should be doing, just like other cities have started doing. Like Oslo was one we identified then. So we can learn from others. We don't have to invent it all ourselves, hopefully. But we need it to be rolled out systematically. We're already more than a third of the way through the climate emergency kind of period that we declared to get to 2030. So I suppose I'm impatient for that, but I want to know how it works and that it will work, and it'll apply to revenue as well as large and small capital projects in a routine way in future. That's my wish.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in on the point about governance, because you're right. There's competing political portfolios involved with this area. Obviously, different officer responsibility as well. So that's why we set up the Strategic Climate and Ecological Emergency Board, and it's been meeting for as long as I've been back in the cabinet anyway. Not sure exactly when it was set up, but just before I came back in. And that has all the senior officers, so we can coordinate that policy, so that so we can avoid that kind of silo thinking. And the main focus of that, anyway, what I'm very keen for that board to focus on, is the 2025 corporate objective of being carbon neutral for our own organisation. So I think it's important that we deliver on that promise, or get there as much as close to it as possible, because it's about setting an example in the city for that 2030 target, and also it's a responsibility that it's in our gift to deliver on that. It's our responsibility as an organisation, whereas the 2030 goal was about how we work with the city, and it would require loads of other organisations to step up to the plate in the city. But that 2025 goal is our responsibility. It's this organisation's responsibility. So I think I've been very keen that the focus of that board is that target, and we get regular updates and reports, and we can see where the challenges are. You raised the fleet issue; that is a challenge. But as a board, we are looking into that. You say we don't just have this one budget line that's working on decarbonisation and climate work. We've got all the money that we've brought in through City Leap. It looks like about 600 million now in the initial business plan over the next 5 years. We're part of the Horizon programme for the 100 climate neutral cities, where we've got a bid on the go with Innovate UK. The first round of that's probably about 80,000, but there's a potential that the second round of funding, if we're successful, could be £8 million of funding. And that's kind of and what we want to look at there is climate finance. How can we deliver more finance into the city? So it's the next billion on from City Leap. And also we've stepped up with the £17 million capital fund, the decarbonisation fund. And I fully expect services within the council to access that fund to help us deliver decarbonisation. And fleet is included in that as well.
Yeah, Martin.
Yeah. Can I just check? Thank you for that. Can I just check a couple of things? Firstly, I mean, the case for invest to save must be ever higher when energy costs are higher. So just an assurance that we're re-reviewing things that might not have had a strong business case before. Even if they had a strong carbon case, they might now have both. So we need to escalate this sort of prioritisation. And secondly, you mentioned the 17 million decarbonisation fund. Is that still being spent at the same rate, or has that been slowed down in this budget?
I think it is that fund which is probably the answer, Councillor, to this Investor Save, because that is available, and we can, along with the City Leap work, which Pete was mentioning, the funding we hope should be available where schemes make sense to deliver. I think there's more we can do to accelerate the spending of that fund. It's something that Councillor Dudd's been very clear with myself and the team that he wants us to focus on and bring forward proposals there. So we'll be doing that.
Just checking, Heather, whether anyone else wants to come in, but over to you.
So your focus is the 2025 target for our own carbon neutrality, and I get that. Personally, I would say that feels unambitious because the impact we could have on carbon emissions when we look outside versus inside. And I want to ask about, do you see that, sorry, Kai, I'm looking at Kai, that you have a strategic role, especially in terms of transport? Because I do think that we are dealing with heat decarbonisation well. I will say, I do say some good things about the administration occasionally. So, but my real concern, as you might have picked up, is transport, because it's a massive part of our carbon emissions, and I don't feel like it's had the same political priority. Do you feel you have a strategic role for behaviour change to get people, in terms of climate here, in terms of getting people out of cars, changing how people travel, and doing things that are potentially politically tricky, as well as the things where we can put money behind something and make something positive and appealing to people?
Well, I think this board, I mean, I'm keen that is the focus of the board, that we meet the 2025 target for our own corporate objective, but it's not the only focus of the board. We discuss various bids that we might put in for additional funding, but we also look at the 2030 target as well, and other one city commitments we've made along, pesticides and biodiversity net gain and policies like that. So we look at all of it, but I'm very keen for that board to focus on 2025. And yeah, you're right. I'm not the transport cabinet member anymore, but I think we've got a major role to play in the city. But we're not the only actor now, are we? In this area, it's the combined authority that needs to step up as well. Clearly, we're in the combined authority, and we've got a vote, and we're the highways authority, so we've got a massive role to play. But we're not the only actor in this area now. And again, alongside trying to tackle the decarbonisation of the energy system, which fundamentally comes down to investment, is the same issue with transport as well.
it's fundamentally an investment issue. If we've got the right levels of investment, we can deliver the ambitious schemes that we need to deliver as a city. And I don't think we're quite there with the levels of funding that are required to deliver city-changing schemes that we would like to deliver, well, as an administration and as Bristol.
Can I ask directly, what have you, as Cabinet Member for Climate, what actions have you taken to focus on the sustainable shift of our transport and behaviour change around car use in Bristol? Because I keep asking about transport, and you talk back to 2025 and you talk about our own organisation. What actions have you taken as a responsibility for climate for something that is 40% of our carbon emissions in Bristol?
Well, that's Don's the Cabinet Member for Transport, so that's a question to him, really.
But this is carbon emissions and you're responsible for climate.
Chair, right. I knew I wasn't going to get a word in while Heather wanted to come out with those points. Certainly, we're there now. But I do think we're straying into wider issues than budget scrutiny.
Jeff, I think Don's quite capable of talking about the work he's doing via WECA as the transport lead. I'm not going to speak for him. I think that's quite disrespectful, really, to not refer those questions to Don.
Only a brief response, Don, because it's not directly. It's an important issue, but it's not a budget issue.
It's critical, and actually, you're right that the emissions for the transport sector in this country are not going down as much as other sectors, and it is a real challenge. But all of our transport policies are aimed at modal shift, but I wouldn't look at them in the way that you seem to do, which is almost like a rather middle-class, puritanical, how do we all change our behaviours? What we need is system change to enable people to be able to live lives realistically without carbon emissions, not just to make different choices. If I refer to the last Cabinet meeting where we had 3 papers, one of which was the roads that we are pedestrianising, another was the use of car parking spaces for micromobility or first and last mile solutions, and the other one was the district car park price increases. All 3 of those reset the relationship between car travel and other modes, and the level of subsidy that we give to them.
Right, I'm going to come in at that point because whilst I have no problem with members calling each other middle class, and I think many of the people we represent would recognise that, I think accusing people of being puritanical isn't actually helpful. So I think we're going to get nowhere further on this item, and it's moved further and further away from budget. So I'm going to move on to item 4, which is savings linked to waste service charges. And who would like to start? Any comments or questions on that? Yeah, Martin?
Yeah, well, Chair, I asked a number of questions on the increase in waste charges that I tabled at Cabinet, but I have not had the reply because I was unable to attend that meeting. So I don't know if we are going to make the savings or reduce the recycling rate because of charges, discourage segregation because of bin replacement charges, increase fly tipping because of higher bulky waste charges. I hope they don't cause that, but I'm worried that the proposals that appeared very late in the budget process may not have the right effect on cutting resource reuse and circular economy and recycling, because I haven't had the information about what impact those charges may have on the actions of residents.
I'm happy to. I mean, Pete can come in with a lot more of the detail, but I think the what you've seen outlined in the budget report are proposals at this stage, and the charges will be finalised through the business plan process of the waste company. So I believe that business plans go into Cabinet in March. So at this stage, they are proposals, but what we've seen in the waste industry and what we pay for the contract and how much it costs the waste company to deliver the service is massive inflation, more so than probably some other services around fuel costs, wages. There's issues around the economy and what we get for recycling material as well. So this is kind of an initial response to try and fill some of that gap in terms of what inflation has done to the costs of operating the service. There's some other pressures that I think might I would say are unresolved, and that's around the current wage claim. So for this year, so the pay date starts in November in terms of the pay claim for the waste company. So we've not settled this year's pay claim yet. So that's a pressure. We've got an envelope within the budget, so that's another pressure. But the final charges will be finalised within the business plan. So there's still time to sort of adjust them. But quite clearly, the waste company needs to raise income to cover the cost of the service as well. I mean, we have increased the what we pay in terms of the contract. I think it's gone up from about 40 million to 41.5 million. So there has been an increase from the general fund in terms of what we pay for the municipal waste contract. But quite clearly, that doesn't fully cover the costs, and it never has, because we've always had charges or raised income through recycling. So it's not been always fully funded from the general fund. So the charges are there because we need to fill the gap. But exactly what those charges are will be finalised within the business plan. And to your question, there are risks with every charge. If you increase the amount we charge for certain things, or bulky waste collections, or bins, for example, there's always a risk that might have an impact on recycling or fly tipping. But it's something that we have to monitor carefully and have the ability to reassess if we do see challenges with that. But again, this is being driven by the financial situation. So we've had to consider things that normally we wouldn't want to consider.
Could I just briefly, yeah. So I appreciate you're saying there are a lot of loose ends there, because that is worrying. So I share that concern, and the fact that this has been done in separate places, in a budget document, in a business plan for a company, and then in a traditionally we've reviewed the service, we've scrutinised the service separately from the business plan. So we need to bring all these things together and actually look at whether it works and how well it works. So I share that concern, but I hope we'll come back to that somewhere where it can be all looked at together, and there aren't too many loose ends and adverse consequences that are actually going to cause knock-on effects that we really don't want to see.
So I think, just to clarify, as I understand it, Tony's not here at the moment, but I believe the waste company business plan is going to Osm on the 27th of February after Budget Council.
Yeah, but the review of the waste service has typically been carried out separately in the community screening. So we need to bring all of that together, along with the available budget and yes, of course, the budget pressures, which we recognise.
Yeah. John and then Mark.
Thanks, Chair. I see, Kai, that you're proposing to charge a delivery charge for replacement recycling boxes. Now, over the past few years, I've put out recycling boxes perfectly intact, absolutely spotless and beautiful, and loaded up with loads of lovely recycling. When I've gone to collect the empty box, it's bashed and bruised and in some cases broken, and I try and sellotape it back and all the rest of it, but in the end it gives up the ghost and it dies. Now, I'm passionate about recycling. I will pay the delivery charge, but I suspect some people might be very aggrieved at that delivery charge if the box has been broken by the Bristol waste operatives.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. As I said, these aren't proposals that will be set in the budget; they'll be set in the business plan. And I've had, I have been lobbied on that issue, and I am listening, so I am, aware of all the issues around that and scenarios. But it does, I think, just off the top of my head, because I don't have the figures here in front of me, I think it costs us around £400,000 a year to deliver all those recycling containers. Pete can probably correct me on that. So this proposal looks to try and recoup at least 100,000, but I think I'm in listening mode on this particular one, I would say, and we've got some time until we get to the business plan. So I think there's an opportunity to relook at this one.
Yeah, if I may, Chair, we replace about 100,000 containers every year at a cost of approximately 450,000. And so the volume is significant, and obviously, if there's a damage, then we would we would provide it for free. That's what we do at the moment. That's what we would do moving forward. The size of the container replacement and the cost is significant.
Mark?
Thank you, Chair. I was going to make the exact same point that John has just made. I've currently got a recycling box that is dying, and actually I watched the waste company just simply throw it, and it cracked on the pavement. Possibly, if we wanted to save some money, maybe tell the waste company to stop creating its next generation of recycling itself by destroying the plastic boxes. And this happens across the city. If they want to save money, maybe treat them with a bit more respect. Instead, we're going to pass it on to... Now, I'm like John, I'll pay the £6 or whatever the hell the cost is. But actually, there'll be some people that won't. You don't have to be Nostradamus to predict that if we're going to start charging people for bulky waste collection even more, for DIY waste, for recycling box waste, then we're actually just going to create more fly tipping. The list of those charges just looks like a fly tipping charter, and that's what's going to be. It's the law of false economics. We may recoup a little bit of money on A. We're going to spend far more of it cleaning up the mess that's then being caused. This just makes no sense to me. Thank you, Chair. Not a question, a point.
Thank you. I just wondered about the logic of charging for Christmas tree recycling. If that has been analysed in how the cost compared to fly tipping, I would also have a concern that if you start charging people for Christmas tree recycling, that people will avoid that cost and a fly tip, or what I would imagine be quite likely do bonfires, which is not environmentally a good idea. So I just wondered if that had been properly analysed versus the alternative.
So I think Pete wants to come in. Sorry, Pete, I didn't expect to speak so much. Do you want to? I'll let Pete answer, then I'll.
So it costs us, again, about £20,000 to recover the Christmas trees.
Sorry, how much?
It costs £20,000 currently to do the removal of the Christmas trees, and if we introduce that charge, if you are a green bin subscriber, then you wouldn't be charged. So you would put your intention would be to put your Christmas tree alongside your green bin, and it would be taken for free.
We don't collect that till the end of January, though.
Pardon, sorry?
We don't collect the green bin till the end of January. To the Christmas tree, you have to wait till the end of January.
Well, we would change that to ensure that was aligned. There are Baines, for example, one of our neighbours doesn't provide that service, so we currently provide that service, but there is a cost. Like for all these charges, there is a risk that yes, there may be increases of fly tipping, but a charge introduction for a lot of free services will also hopefully help behaviour change in terms of compliance and people actually not fly tipping and acting responsibly, because there does need to be a behaviour change to enable us to manage waste, segregate waste, and to buy less, waste less, etc., etc. So we're hopeful that if there is a charge to be introduced, then there would be hopefully a behaviour change.
Sorry, I might be confused. So how does charging people change behaviour?
Well, sorry, in terms of Christmas trees, not so, but for the other charges, yes.
Okay, so with the cost of implementing this charging a £5 and what you might, the risk of fly tipping and bonfires, I'm just working out if you know where that saving, if that saving is actually worth it.
I guess the service that we were looking to, as Kai said, to look at the challenges we've got with the pressures around budgets and costs, and it's a service that currently we do offer, and it was considered as an option for us to put forward, as Kai said, as a proposal.
Okay.
If I can just interject there, the question I have is how much is it going to cost to actually charge individual households for collecting the Christmas tree, and then what are we going to do? Are we going to chip them so that we know they've been paid for? I mean, I'm
sorry, that's what I mean. I can't really work out where that saving is when, you know, this is a new thing, you've got to actually implement it. And then there's a risk of fly tipping if people, you know, want to get around that charge. And so that's why I'm working out if it's really a saving or not.
We would use the system on the online process that we currently have linked to bulky waste, for example, so that it would be relatively straightforward to introduce that charge. It costs us currently £20,000 to collect Christmas trees at the moment, and we would introduce the process online at a minimum cost.
Stephen.
I would just say, Chair, that obviously this is a slightly unusual part of our budget because we have a wholly owned company and we have a business plan that comes later. The proposals in here have come as a result of conversations with the company, and obviously officers have had a conversation about what are the unintended consequences, but what we're not near to at this point is the operational implementation of them. So what this is here to do is to A, show how the service might be able to deliver its part of a balanced budget, and B, to be really transparent about what might be those sorts of choices that we have to make, so they're not fully worked up, and the company and its own board will need to make sure that, you know, it doesn't incur costs for itself, and we, on behalf of the shareholder, will have to do exactly what you're suggesting, make sure that we don't look at the impact and think, well, this is going to cost us 5 times as much in terms of fly tipping. That work hasn't been done. That work will be done before a final decision's made.
Andrew, and then Tessa, did you? Yeah, Andrew first, and then did you want to come in afterwards, Tessa? Yes, sir. Yeah, Andrew.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. I share a lot of the concerns that have already been expressed with regards to most of these measures, with the exception perhaps of the measures around asbestos, because obviously that's it requires special treatment, as I understand it. What I was going to ask is, is there examples of other authorities implementing measures similar to these, and what impacts have they had in their areas? So that's the first question, then I'll maybe come on to the second question.
I mean, I was trying to come in on that actually. So you're very helpful there, Andrew. All of the charges have been benchmarked against either our core city comparators or our neighbouring authorities, and they all, on the whole, they all have similar charges, and on the whole, they're all looking at increasing their charges for certain things. I mean, there might be some core cities that don't charge for certain things, and others do. But we kind of looked across the core cities and our neighbours about what they were planning to do and what they're doing currently. So there's an element of benchmarking. And the other thing that's right around the fire retardants and the new EA regulation, so that's something new. And that's another situation we'll have to monitor closely, because we think that might have a knock-on effect to other organisations that might normally take sofas off people and other large, other items of furniture that have got these fire retardants in them. Because normally some charities would take them and, either upcycle them or if they can't use them, they would deal with the disposal. So we think potentially there might be a risk that those organisations now won't, might say no to certain items of furniture because of the additional costs that have been brought in by the new EA regulations on how these items should be managed. So that's something that we need to keep an eye on as well.
Okay, thank you. And the other question I had was around this issue of the measures in the budget versus the measures in the business case, because obviously we're going to, these measures have been passed by Cabinet and they're going to come to full council where we'll pass them. So if the measures that end up in the business case do not raise as much, or conversely raise more, what happens to that? How is that deficit surplus treated?
I mean, that is the same as every budget assumption. For example, car parking income in 1 year may not be what we've assessed it to be. That's what we have to deal with, that uncertainty. You know, this is a snapshot. This is a view of what we expect to come. There's always uncertainty in any area, so we will have to adjust accordingly if things don't deliver the revenue. And the one thing we know is the numbers are wrong. It's just whether they're up or down.
This may be a slightly left field question, but I live on Windmill Hill. We have very tight streets and people park on either side, and the bins are an issue. And I just wonder, and I'm sure you've thought about this, but is there some way that rather than charging people, we could begin to think of, you know, sort of street collections rather than house collections? You know, so for example, we have large bins that are put, you know, within walking distance of people's houses, and they put their own Christmas trees into the bin. You won't know which house they come from. Would that help with the costs, or are the costs actually associated with, you know, sort of actually getting rid of them once you've collected them?
I think it is something that the waste what we've done historically, because there's certain streets in the city where that's just not possible. A wagon can't get down there, and the waste company and the client function here do work together to come up with solutions. So there are certain streets, say for example in St Paul's, where they have mini recycling centres rather than in individual, you know, each individual house having a collection. We're taking another look at that actually, because that was based on a few years ago, some of those mini recycling centres where the vehicles were much wider, and the ones we've procured in recent years are narrower. So it might be the case that some of those no longer require those mini recycling centres, and also vice versa. There are potentially other streets that would benefit from sort of a more bespoke a way of collecting waste from certain streets. And in the long term, the client function here, because other cities have run pilot projects on this, underground bins. So I think there's a pilot project in Liverpool where there's a communal underground bin, and a wagon comes up and it's got a massive vacuum on the back and sucks all the waste up. So we are looking at what potential innovations are out there for maybe a new house in the States, and can we manage waste in a better and a more efficient way as well.
Just one other thought was that I spent time over in Germany probably about 20 years ago, and in Europe, as many of you know, probably they live in flats, and the waste collection is in the big bins outside, and people do it commonly, and it just feels like that is, I know it's an issue in terms of changing minds, winning hearts and minds, but it's certainly, thinking commonly would be one way, certainly for the narrower streets in maybe inner city areas and flat life. That would be one way that would certainly reduce your costs, I would have thought.
Yeah, I could maybe make a suggestion actually, because we've got a project running at the moment called Flats Recycling Project, because what we found is that maybe logically that recycling rates in blocks of flats and flats above shops and things like that are much lower than your sort of average house for practical reasons. So there's been a lot of painstaking work going on in the city, looking at blocks of flats, block by block, and looking at what potential solutions there are for improving the recycling offer. And that's been making some progress over the last 18 months. So it might be worth maybe at one of your scrutiny meetings calling that in for an update and reviewing that. So I think I mean, I've been quite impressed by that piece of work, really, and I think it's that kind of work that will, lift the recycling rates in the city.
If they can do it in Europe, then perhaps we can manage it here. Yeah, it sounds like a really good idea. Thanks.
Right. I'm going to move on because I'm aware that time is moving on. I have one comment on this, which I think we can explore when we actually get to see the business plan. But I'm intrigued by the fact that the amount the council is paying the waste company is only going up by 4%, when we're told that the level of inflation that we expect to see being incurred is more than that. And that is inevitably going to put pressure on the company. The second question is only an anecdotal one that I've picked up from comments being made, which appears to suggest that the level of fly tipping might already have increased because those who know they're going to have to pay for it are deciding they may as well practice what they're planning for the future now. Is that just surmise that's coming up on social media, or has there been an increase in fly tipping in sort of recent weeks?
Not that's been reported through or has come through to the client or from Bristol Waste, so not that I'm aware of, you say recent weeks.
Okay, so may just be a local issue that I'm picking up. Yeah, okay, thank you. Right, so I'm suggesting that we now move on to item 5, which is new parking charges for small district car parks. And having already pushed my ward, I won't do so on this matter. I shall leave it to others to pass comment, but I have already registered with Don at Cabinet my concerns. So I will take comments from others. So John, Zoe, Brenda. Oh, item 5. Sorry. Yep, item 5, parking charges. So, yep, thank you for that.
I think you have a different...
Your old version. Yeah,
Oh.
you can't fit yet.
Oh.
You shifted them around.
Ah.
Who's that version?
Right. It worked perfectly up till now. So, oh, right. So what do I'm obviously missed something out.
Missed anything out? I think you've
How have
up until then.
All right. I haven't missed. How I've got a different numbering and not missed anything out, I don't know. But anyway, yeah, item 6 on the parking charges. So John first.
Lovely. Thank you, Chair. The Mayor often talks about the law of unintended consequences, and I guess the aim of having parking charges in car parks is twofold. One, to raise a bit of money, but two, to try and somehow hit motorists because we think that's a great idea. But the unintended consequences of the car parking charges at Westbury Car Park and also in Shirehampton, the Westbury one has a medical practice, a medical centre. There are patients who need to go to that car park. Now, we're going to hit them with charges. Waverley Road in Shirehampton, again, some people park there to go to the pharmacy or to the GP practice. Again, we're going to hit people who are ill, sick. I'm not sure they're the sort of people we're trying to discourage from driving because it's such an evil thing to do. The shopping centre at Westbury is under a huge amount of pressure. These parking charges could have a devastating impact on the shops. Are we trying to kill our sort of suburban shopping centres? I know we think a lot about the centre, and some members here represent wards which are very central, and they think the city centre is the whole of Bristol. It isn't. The suburbs are often forgotten. Our shopping centres matter to us. These parking charges could kill our shopping centres that are suffering already. So I'm really concerned that for what is a very small amount of money, we could actually be doing a huge amount of damage. So I really do think we need to rethink these parking charges. I'm very, very concerned. In terms of my ward, it isn't actually, neither of those car parks are in my ward, but I do have quite a lot of residents who do some shopping in Westbury. I'm not sure they'll continue to do so if they have to pay parking charges.
Yeah, first of all, I don't really appreciate the stereotyping of our policy point of view. We aren't hitting evil car drivers or anything like that. We have for a long time subsidised people who use their cars by offering them free car parks, which cost money to run. We would prefer to use that money to support bus services and active travel. And yes, of course, there is GP surgery next to our car park in Shirehampton, as there is one in Westbury. But if the cabinet paper where this was brought forward states that this will improve the management of those car parks, so we'll ensure that there's better turnover. We will not have, as happened in Shirehampton, someone putting a clothes collection bin for several months, which was unnoticed by the council, because nobody actually visits them. So we'll feed into the enforcement as well, because it means someone has to go there to check that car park. There'll be funding for it, and while they're there, they can check the double yellow lines rather than the once a day visit, which has been going on up to now. At the end of the day, underlying this is the fact we do have to raise money, and if we don't raise money to do this, we have to find money somewhere else to keep these parks, these car parks maintained, because they do require maintenance.
If I could just come back, I think we're looking at maybe £150,000 out of a budget which is going to be 460, 470 million. So it is really a drop in the ocean. And I have to come back and say I really don't think we should be hitting people trying to visit their GP. In the case of Westbury, it's also right by the churches, so I understand that the charges will apply even on a Sunday, so churchgoers are going to have to pay as well. I don't think this is something that's good for Bristol at all. For a very small amount of money, I think you're causing a huge amount of damage.
You're entitled to that opinion. Of course, people can use other ways of getting in. Not everyone drives. Many of us don't drive.
I think if you're ill as a patient, you might want to drive.
Not everyone who goes to a GP is actually ill. A lot of people are going there to get prescription or to have a test done or whatever. And we will retain, and we are unusual in this now, we retain blue badge parking spaces for free in every car park, including these ones. So actually, that's a good offer for drivers, but there is a time that for us to recognise that money should be spent on active travel and buses, and people ask for those as well, not just for free car parking.
Patsy?
So I just wanted to come in about the district car parks. I think that firstly and most importantly, the intention of enforcing in these car parks and double yellows and roads and carriageways throughout the city is not to make money. It is to encourage turnover, it is to encourage free flowing of traffic. So I just think that's a very important point that we needed to clarify. And I do take on board your points about shopping centres and doctors, which are in the majority of our more residential shopping areas. And these are a very small amount of district car parks that are not on parity with the rest of district car parks across the city. So this will bring them into line with how we treat car parks across the city. And Councillor Alexander makes a very important point that we do have to maintain and monitor these car parks, which does come at a cost. So we did do some analysis on the car parks, and the Westbury on Prim one and the Beechwood Road one were heavily used and not much turnover at all, people parking there for long periods of time. And one of the things we do want to encourage when people are shopping locally is that instead of driving, they do walk. And that's one of the reasons that we introduce car parking charges, to do behaviour change.
So, Patsy, with respect, I think elderly people are not going to do a big shop and then walk or go on the bus. That's just not going to happen. That's cloud cuckoo land living. In terms of the Westbury car park, there is a time limit, and if you go over your time limit, the traffic warden should be there booking you, and you should be making revenue from that. So it's not an unlimited. I don't see why there's no turnover. If there is no turnover, it's because you're not enforcing the 3-hour limit.
Yeah, they don't enforce very much because we can't afford it. If there was a charge of £1.
Can I just, if we're going to talk about issues, let's make sure we know what we're basing our facts on. And if one looks at the local traffic group that's actually surveyed the car park, they find that people keep to that 3-hour rule. And so one of the concerns is, how do we increase turnover when we allow people to stay for 4 hours rather than 3 hours? That suggests to me that's going to reduce the turnover and therefore make it harder.
Yes, but how do we pay for an enforcement officer to visit those car parks when we don't have the income?
No, I'm not arguing that you shouldn't be charging. I have no problem with charging for the use of the car park, as long as one recognises that there are certain groups, and particularly those who are visiting the area for either a doctor's appointment or a very brief visit to one of the banks, because the other fact is that the ward is now the only area in North Bristol where there are banks. We do not want to be discouraging those people. If you remember my submission to Cabinet, I recognise that anything that's changed will have to enable it to still produce the income that you're expecting to make. I reluctantly accept that. But if we're saying things are going to increase the turnover, when in fact they make it easier for people who can afford to stay there for longer, but actually make it harder for those who want to use the bank or particularly get to the surgery, and we have to recognise the last census indicated that the ward has the oldest age profile in the city, that residents who are going to the doctor's surgery have a need. They are not usually as well as they would like to be. They have no alternative place to park. We're effectively taxing them on being ill. And I do not think that is appropriate. One could give a free hour and charge extra for the next 2 hours to ensure the income was maintained and keep the turnover up. And that would still make it, I'm sure the spaces were available for all who needed them, but would not actually jeopardise the throughput that we need to make the shops and businesses viable.
That's worth discussing. And I think there is a bigger piece of work here to look at the relationship between NHS and our car parks, GP surgeries and our car parks, because the NHS has charged for many, many years for people to go to hospital and even to work people who work in hospital. So in some ways we are more generous than the NHS in this. But I thank you for your offer that you accept the basic premise that we should charge for the car park in Westbury.
Many of my residents do not, but I recognise that this was approved in outline at last year's budget, and therefore is not an issue that's available for us to reverse at this point. But how it is implemented in a way that's fair and acceptable to the local community is key.
We have to go through a TRO process yet, so I think at that stage let's discuss the final detail now that we've accepted the premise. Thank you.
Sorry, Brenda, I interrupted there, but over to you.
Okay. I'm suggesting that we pause and review the proposals for those car parks where there is strong public opposition to amending the charges. It's really important that we listen to and work with the community for the benefit of everyone, including the council, because not one size doesn't always fit all and it doesn't always work. I'm not trying to endorse increased usage of cars. It's more about keeping high streets alive and not impacting negatively on people seeking healthcare treatment who don't have access to public transport. And incidentally, I don't think I could get there on a bus. There's not one that goes around there. So please stop and think. Thank you.
I'm sorry, but now I've started on these things. Just to emphasise, this is not just about charges for residents in the Westbury and Stoke Bishop area. It is about those in the whole of North Bristol that have, if they need to access a bank, need to come in to Westbury on Trim. So it's actually about a wide area of a very mixed background of residents that are affected. So hope that we can, Don, if we can have discussions with the wider North Bristol community before it goes to a TRO, that would be a really helpful way of us engaging. Gary.
Yeah. Putting on charges without having effective enforcement is, a non-starter. What concerns me here is that with a couple of these car parks, which are in, close by where I live, they're quite isolated. It's quite easy for people to park on the street, not necessarily so convenient for the residents there. As soon as the charges go on, that's exactly what will happen. And in terms of the cost of enforcement, if you've got a chap who's actually covering a large number of meters or a large car park, that's very cost effective. But if you've got somebody who's trying to do six parking spaces here, 12 parking spaces a considerable distance away, the cost of enforcement is going to take away a large percentage of what you're asking people to pay. So what I would actually ask is that you publish in detail the figures from this, if you're actually going to implement it, to see if it really does make any significant money or not. And that way we'll be able to judge whether it was a good idea or not.
So we got the figures from the projections of how they would stack up. So we don't know the reality yet, obviously. We know what we're projecting.
With respect, I've seen projections before.
Thank you. Get a lot of requests from people out on the estates, like my own ward, for more enforcement of double yellow lines. I think bringing enforcement officers out there more often to check car parks and to check double yellow lines at the same time is more of a joined up approach. At the moment in North Bristol, they come to Shirehampton once a day, and obviously people wait till they've gone and then other things go on, unfortunately. So I think it meets a double need there of actually more enforcement and the necessary funding to ensure that enforcement actually happens.
Patsy?
Thanks, Chair. So just to add to what Don's just said, as part of the review that we undertook on the car parks, we did undertake how we would enforce and how we would make the enforcement effective. And we actually have replanned routes so the enforcement officers can tie in those car parks when they're visiting that local area. So we have done a review of enforcement and how we would do that as well. So they would be enforced.
Mark?
Thank you, Chair.
I just look forward to seeing the figures.
Thank you, Chair. I don't accept the premise. I'm going to be a bit more combative on this one. I don't understand the intellectual gymnastics the council goes through. We can afford to throw tens of millions of pounds at Colston Hall because we recognise the value that it provides to the city in the nighttime economy. But we are going to start charging a tiny amount in small car parks because we don't seem to recognise the importance they have to secondary high streets. We don't seem to get it. I'm sorry. The small car parks we're talking about are actually vital for those areas of the city. Invariably, they're on the outskirts. So if you talk about the one on Crow Lane itself and Henbury, a lot of my residents work, for example, over in Filton, they work over in Avonmouth. You can't get there via bus, so they travel. When they come back via car, they park and they do their shopping. You take away the car park, they're just not going to do it. They're going to go to Cribbs Causeway, and it's all going to flow up there, which is what happens every single time we try and hit the motorists like this. And Brenda knows this. It'll happen in Southmead as well. It just flows somewhere else. We're actually going to do untold harm to our high streets for very little revenue. We brought in the parking charges of Blaze, the result being the car park's normally empty and the local streets are rammed. Now, we're used to that being in the summer when the local streets are hammered. Instead, we're having it in the middle of January, and it's a freezing January, and they're still overwhelmed. I don't have to be Nostradamus to predict you're not going to raise the money you wanted, and I'll make you a prediction, we don't see any enforcement officers either. You'll take the money off those people that actually stick to the rules and pay, but you probably won't see an enforcement officer there that inflicts a fine. And I'm afraid that's exactly what's going to happen. I can be here in 2 years, and I'll be proven right. This is a disastrous move, and it's not going to work, and it's just going to harm communities. It's a really bad idea.
Thank you, Mark. I think you've just given Ian and Joe a nice summary to to conclude on. Does anybody else have anything to add on this? And if it can be new rather than expressing the same things, Andrew and then Emma.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, there was often a lot of focus on North Bristol, but I think my colleague that I'm standing in for today would want me to raise that it's not just North Bristol. In Brislington, there's two car parks, and they're concerned about the impact in Repton Road and the potential for driving car parking from the car park onto street parking. And in Brislington, on Brislington Hill, the impact on the local shops there, but also the fact that there is free or ostensibly free car parking adjacent to that car park. So you might end up in a situation where people decide to park at Lidl instead of paying the £1 or £2 or whatever to park in the council car park. So it might be counterproductive.
Emma.
Thank you. So I'm going to make a bit of a sort of suggestion based on what I've heard, because a lot of this is to do with people's fears and worries about the future, and I think we all hear that. There's always concerns when big changes are made, and I'm going to agree with Don about, like, not everybody has a car, and people get to the doctors without having a car, and, you know, so it's not necessarily penalising car drivers, based on economics, when actually a lot of people, you know, they pay to go on the bus to go to the doctors. But in terms of sort of a way forward with this, what often happens in situations where businesses in particular are concerned that they are going to lose business, and it's a real worry, and I get that, is, you know, does that actually happen? I know what they were doing in London with the LTNs, where there was a lot of concern with businesses. Officers went and worked with the businesses and said, well, let's look at your books. Are you being impacted? Is there other things that are impacting you? Are there ways that we can get you on board? You know, I think when we hear worries from residents, we're only hearing the worry from residents. We're not hearing the people who just, you know, get on with it. But so where there is a very specific concern about the doctor's surgery, the businesses, is there a way that going forward with this, you can speak to those people and actually see if that is an actual issue, even the doctor's surgery, and if there's anything there that can help those specific businesses and customers, so that rather than it just like, oh no, people are worried about this, we won't do it, we can actually identify those concerns and actually work with the businesses moving forward to alleviate them as you go along.
I think my comment to that would be that most of those businesses are 1-, 2- and 3-man bands who actually don't have the time to talk with people because they're flat out every minute that they are working. And they're also very much on a balance of whether their businesses are viable or not. And I don't think they have the capacity for those. I'd love to think they would, but I fear they don't have the capacity for those discussions. Certainly in the Westbury patch, many of the traditional retail businesses have already gone, which is why we now have charity shops of one form or another in their place. And if that happens to many more businesses, then actually there won't be enough retail operation to be drawing in the footfall to make the remaining charity shops viable. So there is a real concern there, which is why I'm keen that we have discussion with Don and with officers, because this is about how we make sure that the business and the community is sustainable in the future, so that it can carry on paying parking charges, not so that we actually lose people from the village so that we can't. Unless anyone else, oh yeah, Barry, and then I'm going to close on this one.
Thanks very much. I really welcome that the administration is considering the potential to manage demand, to change behaviour through parking charges. where I am in Bristol, there are swathes of the city where our streets and pavements are clogged with parked cars constantly, all the time. Some, as Councillor Varney mentioned, some of the some of the proposed charges for car parks are in areas that have free, uncontrolled parking surrounding them, like Juicy Road in Lawrence Hill, for example, where the streets are fully at capacity with parked cars constantly. There are no charges. Navigating the pavements can be a real hazard, especially if you're disabled or if you have a buggy. Has there been any broader consideration to the use of charging and to parking management across those areas of the city that don't currently have residence parking zones, and that, like Lawrence Hill, like Easton, are constantly overstuffed with parked cars?
It's a matter of resource, really. What we need is for the city is a strategy, really, for parking for the whole city, and that's something I've asked for. But it was said, and it's absolutely fair. What do you want us to drop? You know, the freight strategy or the strategy? Because we're just short of resources, really, for putting together a great, doing a vast amount. So I think these smaller things, one hopes they're welcomed, but they're a step forward in some areas like this. But I agree we need a wider strategy for parking for the whole city. There are other things that we've got planned, but we perhaps lack a strategic approach, I think. But that would take resource to produce, and that would be resource that you'd take from actually doing things like this.
Would you agree, though, that that having charged parking, a parking strategy that included charging, could potentially be, well, as in this case, revenue positive, or at the very least revenue neutral, right? So, you know, we could make that investment and actually have revenue ongoing, and have all those other benefits in terms of behaviour change, in terms of demand management, in terms of turnover, at the same time. It's worth doing, I think.
Obviously, it doesn't solve the problem of how you get from here to there. You know, it's not like switching a light on and the profit comes in. There is a whole process there of legal and consultation work to go through. But I certainly see parking as an important part of demand management, and we certainly need to review all of our parking charges and keep them under review. Otherwise, relative to bus travel, car travel becomes cheap, which is part of the problem. Bus travel is not always very, very expensive. Sometimes it's just more expensive than jumping in a car.
Tessa, I really need to bring this item to a close. One point.
South Bristol is the poor cousin to North Bristol in so many ways. I've lived there for 25 years. We had a consortium of 5 councillors, including Councillor Mark Bradshaw, Southville and Windmill councillors, who got together and got into the press and begged parts of Bedminster and Southville for residents parking, because it is an absolute nightmare. And now we're going to have, within my area, we're going to have 10,000 new homes. We've got, I mean, Windmill Hill is just covered in people parking there. They park up there for weeks, actually. And I'm sort of speechless with fury that South Bristol is just being so disregarded by our mayor. It feels almost like a vendetta. Sorry, you know, we need residents parking there. Sorry, that's the end.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that Windmill Hill was the most disregarded area of South Bristol, but you'll know that the officer responsible for that has had had some health problems. So I had a meeting last week to try to re-energise. Okay, well, thank you. The officer in charge of that has had some health problems, so I had a meeting with him, or exchanged some emails to try and re-energise that process, because we do have Section 106 money from the Bedminster Green development which can be applied, and we do need to have a joined-up approach with, as you say, Mark, Tony, and others, and we did start that before the officer was ill. He's also had to manage the Bedminster Green and some of the challenges of the traffic management down there, which were always going to be difficult, and they are difficult. So he will get about the work down there soon, I hope.
Members, I'm proposing to move on, and I'm very sensitive to the fact that Ellie has sat here the whole meeting and hasn't, and I must be feeling very left out. I'm sure you're envious of Don having so many questions to answer, and Tom's joined us as well. So, members, if you can just give some thoughts of how we can make them feel appreciated and ask so many questions. But what I was just going to do with the rest of the agenda, and I felt that the growth and regen issues that we've gone through were ones that I know gave members concern. Item 7 says general concern about the need for a clear parks and green space plan / strategy. I'm proposing that we leave it at that, and that can go in our comments, but I think starting a discussion about parks and green spaces strategy now is not really going to be helpful to budget scrutiny, but that is an issue that perhaps we may, through the appropriate commissions, want to make sure we keep on the work programme for next year. I've got Mark and Gary. Let me just talk through what I'm proposing, given the time, because item E on here related to the capital programme and was talking about the external auditor's report and slippage within the capital programme. And either Stephen or Denise, my thoughts are that those are issues which are ongoing, and would it perhaps be appropriate if we talk with Tony about where that goes, but it possibly came to a resources meeting post-budget, because it doesn't have to be dealt with before the budget? Would that?
I agree, it's more of a performance rather than a budget-related matter, so it's probably not the right forum for it.
Yeah, so we do that, but the third bullet point there, relating to carbon impact, I'm very much aware related to Carla's public forum statement, and we should at least discuss that briefly. Item F talked about spend to save, and we talked about that at our first meeting, and it's come up in various discussions today. So I suggest we don't discuss that further, other than it being noted in our comments as, again, possibly a resources issue for consideration fairly urgently over the next civic year. And certainly I think there might be just one or two very brief comments on the HRA to make Tom's visit worthwhile. But if we can try and do that, and I'm aware we've already been going for 2.5 hours, so I am going to conclude this at 7 o'clock, whatever we've got done. So I'm giving you an indication of that. So Gary and then Mark, if you wanted to challenge what I've just suggested, please do it briefly.
Very briefly, on parks and green spaces, not much point in speaking about it here. It came to community scrutiny. It was the most shambolic document I've ever seen in my life, and I've seen a few. They're not actually going to, they were proposing not to even go out to consultation on this non-plan. Fortunately, that's now happening. it's coming back to community scrutiny, and it will need to be a lot better than it was before.
Mark?
Mine was going to be a question.
Mark, if you comment, and then I'll go to Ellie.
Yeah, just a question to Councillor King. I was actually going to read, I understand there is a parks plan coming. I just wondered if you could give us a time frame. That was a straightforward, straight question. I thought there's a park strategy I heard coming soon. I just wondered if you could give me a time frame. That's all I wanted to know.
Sure, yeah. Gary, you haven't sent the Parks and Green Space draft strategy yet, so I don't know how you can comment on it. You saw some presentation slides and that's it. So that you've got an opinion on it, it's still in draft, it's still getting worked on by officers, it isn't available yet for comment on. So
the present strategy is not being actioned in the way that it was promised. Bits of it are just disappearing, and the parks management is non-functional at the moment. You know, it's
Sorry,
just,
Gary, I'm not disagreeing with it or commenting on anything you're saying, but at this stage we need to confine our discussions to what's directly related to the budget. And so I go back to my point that that is something that I think is much more appropriate dealt with through community scrutiny than it is through this budget meeting, because we haven't got any grounds for pursuing what you're saying.
Thanks, Jerry. I also hadn't finished speaking either. Councillor Weston, June is going to be is when we're aiming to have the Parks and Green Spaces strategy coming to Cabinet. That's what we're aiming for. And before that, there'll be a consultation period, and on that and several other strategies, such as the tree strategy, the allotment strategy, the managing land for nature strategy. So it's... Pardon? Yeah, well, hopefully it'll be quite an interesting collective period of working together and working closely with the Parks Forum and trying to design that and what it will look like so that engagement will feel quite meaningful.
Okay, thank you, Ellie. Okay, so then we take the carbon impact of projects next, and I'm guessing, Martin, do you want to? Do you want to
Chair,
just...
I think I probably said what's needed earlier, which I really want to see how this will be put together to combine the financial management and the carbon management of what the council does, both capital and revenue. And I was told the initial assessment of the review of some projects is in 2 to 3 months, is that right? But what I'd like to know is what will follow on from that, so will you make progress in this overall?
So therefore, if we add that, Denise, to the report back that comes to scrutiny on the capital programme as an update on that, would that be?
Yes, I mean, I'm looking to colleagues. I think that Pete gave an overview, I think, or a time scale of when we think, or somebody did earlier, I can't remember, I think it was Pete or John, when we think we can come back with something firmer in terms of the carbon tracking and monitoring for both revenue and capital. Was it a 3-month time scale, John?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. And if we're happy that it goes to resources scrutiny, then is that what we're proposing?
We'll check with the boss when Tony's available. But yeah, I'm guessing that's what will happen. But we'll confirm. Stephen, did you want to? No. Okay, members. Anything else? Anything on the HRA while Tom is here? Mark?
Sorry, I'm stood up because people are moving around for water. It was a reflection on the HRA. It was just about the cladding and the waking watch and all that element to it. I wasn't sure all of the cost that we're expecting is fully shown within the budget. So I just wonder if there's something that we're expecting in a couple of years' time to hit us that we might not know about.
I'll partially answer, then pass to my colleagues. Yeah. So in terms of the figures you'll have seen quoted, I think the 97 million figure that we're talking about, that's all encompassing. Not all of that will be in the 5-year medium-term financial plan, because some of that is beyond the 5 years. The sprinklers is within the 5-year medium-term financial plan, as is the waking watch, as is simultaneous evacuation alarms. But the EPS cladding removal stretches for up to 10 years.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Tom, is there any way that scrutiny can be briefed on the ongoing costs and whether those figures could be saved or reduced by accelerating the spend? And I realise accelerating the spend, there is a limit to how much can be spent and implemented given the demand around the country for the same solutions. But it does seem to me that some of the mitigations are a huge charge on the HRA, and given the inflation that's applying to the costs of implementation as well, I'd just be intrigued to see the calculations that show whether we could or why we can't save more by trying to spend more sooner. Does that make sense?
I think so. So again, Donald, feel free to jump in. But I think what I would say initially is we're constantly looking at that, and so the cost of the Wake and Watch have already come down a bit from what we took to Cabinet before Christmas on that basis. But the other thing we are doing, of course, is the past 9980 assessments, and it may be that the outcome of some of those assessments for some blocks is that a Wake and Watch is no longer required. We're not going to presume and we'll follow the advice we're given in consultation with the fire service, but that may happen too.
So, in terms of the waking watch, my interpretation of a waking watch is a watch that's during the sleeping hours, if you like. Is that the case, or when is the waking? What period of time is the waking watch in general?
It's meant to be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
It is 24 hours a day. Right. Okay, that's reassuring.
Okay, Chair, can I answer that? Address that
please.
A bit further. Just for good evening, councillors. The waking watch issue, as you know, is a product of an emergency and a review of what happened in relation to two fires and the impact on cladding. And following intensive discussions with the fire service, we took an extremely risk-averse approach and decided to introduce 24-hour waking watch across 38 blocks. Now, the figures that appear in the budget, to answer the first question, will not be fully accurate. And I say that in the sense that the objective is to reduce that cost, but we've allowed that provision should Waking Watch have to go on over a year and a half. But the clear objective is to introduce the communal alarms, which is also represented in the budget. And on the advice of the fire service, by doing that across the blocks means that we can do away with Waking Watch. So the provision is there, but the objective is to spend less. As we remove the cladding, we've accelerated the programme in the HRA budget, and there's a twin objective. One is to remove the cladding and replace it with non-flammable rock wool cladding, but also at the same time, given that we have the scaffolding up where cladding is present, is to do window replacements and other refurbishment work so that we maximise the return on that investment, and that in turn should increase the energy efficiency of blocks with new windows and the cladding. Okay, thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions that they want to raise? David? Oh, right, Andrew.
So just on that, it does seem prudent to facilitate, funds for that Waking Watch with the intention of spending less if that's possible. If you do spend less, are you anticipating then that surplus would go back to ease the HRA budget pressures in subsequent years, or have you got other things on your wish list that you'd like those savings to go to?
As Councillor Reinhardt's referred to, there are a number of strands to mitigating fire risk. One is, yes, in the short term, Waking Watch. Two is the removal of wicking wash by having other remediation measures. One is communal alarms. One is sprinklers, which don't affect the integrity of the external cladding, but is an internal facility, and as well as the free smoke alarms that we install, and the fire service will carry out free inspections and further installations if required. And then there's also the exit strategy at the moment from a building that is in jeopardy. And there are two strands that at the moment. One is where cladding remains in place. We've moved from, on the advice of the fire service, from stay put to mass evacuation. The objective being to move back to stay put. And what stay put is based on is ensuring that all our fire doors are up to date, working and not in need of repair. Plus changing the policy on, or reinforcing a policy to have communal areas clear from debris, obstacles that people may fall over, or indeed scooters with an electric charger. And we're saying that they should be in the cages down below where those cages are. And if there aren't facilities for that, and we will install them according to demand. As the first fire at Twinnell House, the source of that was identified as batteries being charged en masse, and so it's a package of measures, and but I just want to stress that, you know, we are with the 24-hour wicking watch as a short-term measure as reassurance to our residents, and also just one final point on lifts and personal evacuation plans. Again, we're working with the fire service and estate management to identify any vulnerable people in a tower block so we can devise a personal escape plan for them. And secondly, in relation to lifts, although lifts do not work for residents where there is a fire, the fire service do use the lifts as they use them to bring up equipment and other actions during a fire. I may have missed some of the question, but I'll respond accordingly.
Just to pick up the other part of the budget proposals currently mean that in order to get everything to stack because of the significant investment in fire safety, there's current projected, I think it's about £6.5 million drawdown of HRA reserves. And so the first call, if there's a reduced cost, would be to reduce the amount of drawdown from the reserves. Would be the first port of call.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to indulge you and go back to the savings table to talk about the biggest saving that's talked about here, the temporary accommodation need, which is going to be a saving of nearly £2 million. I'd like to know about the timeline of actually providing this temporary accommodation, where it's going to be and how many units we're actually going to be providing, please.
So, what was the question?
That's right. We can provide that post-meeting and get that circulated. I think some information was shared, wasn't it, previously? So we'll get that circulated to Paul Sylvester. I was overlooking his shoulder at a spreadsheet with the plans. Obviously, the caveat I would give is the housing market more broadly is facing some quite significant challenges at the moment, and there we are starting to see a slowdown, particularly on commercial schemes. So we're just keeping an eye on what that does and what's happening around cost inflation and everything else, but the plan is still to proceed and we'll share the exact details with you.
That was going to form the basis of my follow-up about how credible it is actually to provide this level of accommodation in the time frame we actually need it, given the current market conditions.
So I think it's credible, but as Tom has indicated, there's risk in it, just like everything. We do have a number of different avenues at our disposal. You know, we're a landowner, we're a large social housing provider, but we also have relationships, for example, with the University Trust, you know, that has enabled us very rapidly to identify their 24 homes that were empty and were capable of being converted. I think the key thing here is to recognise that we've got this tremendous asset and we have a number of significant challenges as a council which relate to expensive accommodation, whether it's care leavers, whether it's people in temporary accommodation, some of whom are single, unaccompanied, others have larger families, and there are many people in adult social care who would also benefit and save the council money by being moved into general needs housing. So this is a really big piece of work. This is a programme within which the temporary accommodation thing that you're referring to is a clear and obvious project, but you will have seen, if you looked in previous scrutinies and previous budgets, you would have seen a reference to property in certainly adults and with care leavers in children's and families. So we are under no illusion. That's a big piece of work, but we know that there is enough volume, whether it's churn in housing, whether it's new build coming on, the RPs, etc. We know there's a lot of housing coming on stream. We've just got to make the best use. And ultimately, the big thing, the great opportunity for us is it's not only good for the council in terms of financial sustainability, it's much more importantly delivering far better outcomes for residents, whether they are care leavers, whether they are people who have been in a social care setting and who can live very happy lives, fulfilled lives with little support in general needs housing. So it's a win-win, but it's a massive, massive task to get that right.
Anybody else? Right, in which case, members, I'm going to bring this to a close. Can I just conclude though with a number of thanks? Tom, Don, and Kai, if you could pass on to your colleagues our appreciation for your time and your responses. Don, you along with Helen and Asher, I think took the lion's share, and I'm sure Tom and Kai aren't going to complain about that. But thank you. It's something that's now happened for a couple of years, and I think it's really positive that cabinet members come along and are able to explain and put their case, and that's very much appreciated. We won't all of us always agree with what you have to say, but we nevertheless recognise it's really helpful to hear it from you. So thank you for that. Can I thank officers for your time, and particularly those who've turned up and haven't had to contribute. Do appreciate you being here. But to everybody else, I realise this is a large chunk of time. And so thank you for your engagement. And Stephen, thank you for spending the whole of the time with us, which is very impressive. I will thank Joe and Ian again for their fantastic contribution. If I might thank Ian for being the one person who's had to be alert the whole of the time and concentrate on who was speaking. So, and we'll know if you weren't when we look at it tomorrow. But thank you. And members, we will circulate the notes first of all for your comments, and then we will draft a submission to then put in with the papers for full council. But thank you all for your time and your contribution. I declare this meeting closed.